So another year in film has come and gone, and in spite of the pandemic, we still did get a share of films all of us could enjoy in this dreary time. And yes, there were a ton of movies I was looking forward to that were slated for 2020 that you'll now see on my most anticipated films of 2021 list. But for what the year was, there were about a dozen films this year I really did have a great time with. And no, I didn't get to see everything released in 2020, but the ones I did get to see, I wound up enjoying. So without further ado, here are my top 5 favorite movies of 2020. But this list wouldn't be complete without some honorable mentions. Here we go. Superman: Man of Tomorrow. This year was great for Superman animation, but this movie in particular showcases the sheer optimism in Superman's earlier days, and it also is one of the most well-animated DC movies I've ever seen. For any DC fan, this movie is a must-see. The Invisible Man was such a chilling and very subtle thriller masterfully crafted by Leigh Whannell, and I can't wait to see more of his work in the future. Also, Elizabeth Moss gave an extraordinary performance that may be one of the best I've ever seen in a horror movie. Bill and Ted Face the Music was the most purely fun and optimistic movie I needed to enjoy this year, and for a sequel years in the making, they honestly pulled it off. Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves still rock it out playing these characters, and it truly did pull on those nostalgic heartstrings while also just being a movie brimming with such heartfelt positivity. And finally, the Bee Gees' How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? I love a great music documentary that not only showcases how great these artists are, but also makes you think about what they were like as people and the sort of repercussions society left on them. This movie also made me think about society differently in regards to the Disco Sucks movement and how it's insanely similar to the discourse we see in our society today. But in the end, it's a very educational piece about culture and just made me remember how important music is in our day-to-day lives. And now, here are my top 5 favorite movies of 2020. Number 5 is Wonder Woman 1984. This was pure 80s George Perez run flavor that Patty Jenkins directed the heck out of. And yes, this movie wasn't a World War I historical epic like the first movie, but this was in a different era where Wonder Woman actually had to be a superhero in a different period. The aesthetic was fun and gave you that awesome Bronze Age flair and such brilliant lightheartedness that reminds you how amazing Diana is as a hero. The villains in both Maxwell Lord and Cheetah both worked for me so well, and I loved how their stories intertwined to give us such a rich conflict. I loved watching this movie. I thought the look of it was impeccable, and the writing was so damn strong that I absolutely think Patty Jenkins is no doubt one of the best directors working today, and now I'm dying to see her tackle Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Number 4 is Justice League Dark: Apocalypse War. Watching all the movies in this series was worth it. To see the entire series culminate basically in terms of comic movies was the Avengers Infinity War Endgame for DC Animation. Every character had their moment to shine, and it was just the most insane feast for the eyes for any DC fan. I love it when any superhero story goes all out while also giving us monumentally awesome character moments, whether they're in the action or having heartfelt drama. It was an awesome movie that dealt with the repercussions of the entire series. I love how the continuity factors in, and it culminates in a pretty fantastic film. It is no doubt one of my new favorite DC movies. Number 3 is Tenet. This was my most anticipated movie of 2020, and even though there were a couple more movies that hit it a little more for me, I absolutely adored possibly one of the most mind-bending cinematic experiences I've probably ever seen. I actually didn't get around to see it in theaters, so I read the screenplay beforehand and was so blown away by what I read that it was a little difficult at times to think about how the film was going to look. And then to finally see it in full on 4K Ultra HD was just magnificent. It really does have a ton of replay value, and yes, the movie is confusing, but the fact that I was so emotionally invested in the film and that I kept thinking about this movie after I watched it says a lot to me. I love Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker. I love the gritty aesthetic he brings to each of his films. The crisp cinematic look of it adds this crazy element of realism, which is why I love that he shoots on film. I can't believe Nolan makes films as good and deep as they are, and whatever his next endeavor is, I'll be first in line to see it, and will continue to revisit such a fantastic track record of films. Number 2 is Onward. This movie really touched me in a way that I never thought it would. It touched my love of fantasy so beautifully, but also this really powerful message about gaining courage. Because let's face it, we've all had moments where we've been afraid to do something. It was so wonderfully told, and I also just loved how this movie handled the family angle. The bond Ian and Barley had was so brilliant, and I cared so much about their whole dynamic and the whole deal about them seeing their father. Like any Pixar film I've loved, I got those deep emotional pulls, and animation-wise, it's just another impressive feat. The whole fantasy suburbia angle felt so fresh for Pixar, and that's what's been making them so brilliant lately with their original content. It enriched my love of fantasy and coming-of-age stories, and it truly felt like one of those films that was made for someone like me. Thank you, Pixar. And that thank you is about to get even bigger because my favorite film of 2020 is Soul. I was looking forward to this movie, and I knew that with it being an original Pixar film I'd enjoy it, but I'm just going to get this out of the way. This is one of the single greatest animated movies I have ever seen in my entire life. I've been a fan of Pixar all my life, and to think that as an adult I can still get so moved by their movies is something to commend. And the originality put into a film like this to make it more inventive and go all out with its animation is honestly something I never expected to see. The animation for this film is just stellar, creating one of the most imaginative environments like we saw in The Great Before. This crazy mashup between 2D and 3D was a spectacular feat, and when we're on Earth, you could tell Pixar was really pushing for that photorealistic look, and it works so beautifully. It's most certainly one of the best looking and most creative of Pixar's endeavors. And the way the film developed the main characters in Joe Gardner and 22, it felt the most human and I felt so connected to them. Without spoiling anything, I honestly loved how the film was trying to convey how these characters felt because we felt it too as living human beings. I'll admit that Onward was of the two Pixar films this year that made me cry. I didn't cry during Soul because I was more left in awe and so moved by what I saw that I absolutely adored this film and how it was made and how honest it told its story. I never thought I'd experience a film like this, and I could talk about it for hours. It reminded me why film can be such a wonderful art form, and how animation can be used to communicate such rich emotions. Soul is a masterpiece. To think Pixar's most recent movies end up being some of the best I've ever seen from them is amazing, and I didn't expect both Pixar films to be in my top 2 this year. But seriously, both these films are probably top 3 Pixar of all time for me. I just love how their original films are being handled lately. Thanks so much for watching, and yes, this year wasn't the greatest, but I'm still glad we had these movies to enjoy, and that we could escape into in spite of the more depressing times. These were the movies I needed to enjoy this year, and in a sense replenish the soul, because all these films reminded me how powerful creativity can be, and that we need entertainment to escape, and for us as artists to be inspired. So if you're watching this on whatever platform, whether Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, comment below a film that doesn't necessarily have to be your number one favorite, but one that comes to mind that you greatly enjoyed and was the film you needed in spite of bleaker times. Be sure to check out my most anticipated films of 2021 video. Very excited about what's to come. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.